I'm Stacy Siegel, the Executive Director for the Seattle Architecture Foundation. Seattle Architecture Foundation is a nonprofit organization with the mission of connecting the public to the architecture, design, and history of our city. We believe that the more you engage with design, the more you feel connected to your changing city. We provide tours, talks, programs for kids and families, and special events. For more than 30 years, we have engaged the public through architecture walking tours all over Seattle. Our tours are led by passionate, trained volunteer guides who bring a unique perspective to the past, present, and future of our city. We hope you enjoy this tour preview, learn something new, and are inspired to explore our city and its neighborhood in new ways with one of our guides. Visit our website at seattlearchitecture.org to sign up for a tour today. You can also experience the best in Seattle architecture at your own through our mobile tour app, now available for free on iOS or Android. Thanks so much. Enjoy this preview.
Hi, I'm Eric Holm, and I'm with the Seattle Architecture Foundation. I'm one of their many volunteers, and I've been volunteering since 1996. I'm really excited to introduce one of our weekend neighborhood tours, Madrona, streetcar suburb model for neighborhood involvement. And Madrona actually has one of the most intact neighborhood business districts in the city, so we'll see that in a little bit. But Madrona's unique in its historical community involvement that's guided its neighborhood's built environment to reflect its collective value of inclusion plus adaptation to changing times while respecting its past. Madrona is unique in how it's situated in that on the east, it is Lake Washington is its boundary, while on the west, it's Martin Luther King Way. To the north, it's Denny Way, and to the south, it's Cherry Street. And it has the demographics of some of the wealthiest and some of the poorest people in the area, as well as corresponding education levels. So it makes it a unique community. For an overview, there are really 4 phases about the development that goes to the tour itself. And the first is the first peoples here who were the Duwamish, who came here for the beautiful hunting and fishing. That also brought the first white people who called it Hunter's Glen. But it was the woods and the lumber that brought people here. And it was the Puget Sound Mill Company that basically logged the area clean by 1890. It was recognized that it was ripe for residential and real estate development, but they needed a draw. So what they did was they had a trolley line from 34th and Union north to Howell that meandered through a forested ravine that was called the most exciting and treacherous ride in the city. It landed at the new 1892 Madrona Resort that's currently Madrona Park. Well, this seemed to work and Madrona took off, and its development really of all of the residential properties primarily took place between the turn of the 20th century and 1930. 1930s was the National Depression, and really not a lot happened, but phase 2 started with World War II. And there was a huge influx of new people from the Midwest and South for jobs. Many of these were of color, and they moved into the area, changing the demographics and the dynamics. Like many urban cities through this period, after World War II, there was a lot of movement to the suburbs, as well as a lot of freeway construction in the area. It also led to the 60s, where there were cultural changes and a lot of conflict. We move into the next phase, which was by 1980, the neighborhood had been rediscovered, spectacular sights, views, and homes, as well as the collective community that had kept the area going, was really a great draw. And part of that is the business district, and that's the first stop we're going to talk about. We're now standing at the corner of Union and 34th, which is the heart of the business district in Madrona. And as I just mentioned, it's also one of the most intact business districts of this type in Seattle. These type of neighborhoods were essential in neighborhood development. There was a streetcar from downtown that came here, and when people got off, they generally had to do their shopping every day. So there were grocery store, drug stores, beauty shops, barbers, dry cleaners, pharmacies, dance studios. There were many things available for all the needs in the neighborhood. And this district has remained intact and functioning for its entire history. through many, many different periods. The building behind me is a perfect example of 1920s storefront construction. So let's talk about the architect and the architecture itself. The architect was Victor Verraes. He first came to Seattle in 1904, like many architects who were drawn to Seattle, recognizing it was a boom area and the opportunity for business. Mr. Verraes was also smart. He recognized that with business structures, residential was huge. And so he made a fortune off of house plan books. And he was noted for his four-square or classic box houses in particular, which are particularly noted in Seattle as a classic form. The storefront we're standing in front of reflects the 1920s in shopping. There are 6 storefronts down 34th, and then one further down going down Union. The store doors are recessed for entry, but it has plate glass windows for more display, with giant transoms along the top to bring in as much light as possible. At the far end of Union, at the portion of the building that's now painted white, was originally the Wynn Garage. It was there not only to service cars, but it also garage cars for people who worked downtown. They could park there, take the streetcar downtown, come back, do their shopping, pick up their car, go home. It was one of the prototypes of the turn of the 20th century park and rides. Time marches on though. By the time the 50s roll around, the Wynn Garage had become the Cirque Theater, and that was one of the first neighborhood legitimate theaters. That theater in turn, in the late 60s, early 70s, changed hands over to the Black's Arts West, which was Seattle's first African-American theater. After that, it became a Baptist church, and then reflecting the 90s, it was an internet company until the dot-com hit. Glassy Babies, which is a local business with some acclaim, now is housed in the same facility and kind of reflects the change in demographics in the neighborhood. If we look up and down the street, we can see a historic photo of what it looked like in 1941, and we can see that it truly hasn't changed all that much in the past 70 years. That is a direct reflection of the neighborhood involvement. Also, we have a shot of the 1968 to 1978 headquarters for the Black Panthers, who chose Madrona as a central area to have their first branch storefront outside of Oakland. But with the business district set up, it was really geared for the residential areas, and that's going to be our next stop. We're going to be talking about homes in Madrona. We're standing in front of the List Bustle House on 36th Avenue in Madrona. And it's a great example of a home. But let's first talk about the owners. The house was built in 1892 and is one of the oldest houses in Madrona. It was built by George and Julia List, who were real estate developers. They sold the house in 1900 to Charles and Nina Bustle. And they're an interesting story for this couple. It kind of reflects the type of people who were coming to Seattle to make their fortune. In the 1880s, their first business, the Seattle Soap Company, failed. They took what money they had left and invested then in tidelands and other properties around the area. And people questioned their sanity because why would anyone want to buy land that was underwater? Well, it turns out they were fairly wise because the railroads purchased all of that land in 1906 for $1.6 million, and that's over $44 million in today's money. Of a personal note about the Bustles, when the house was being renovated in the 1970s, love letters were found in a bathroom wall that were written by Mr. List to his young bride. And they contain lines of great affection as well as the descriptions of the challenges of a marriage and struggles of a business. Let's go back to the architecture and the Queen Anne design. What is that? It was popular in the United States from the 1880s to 1890, 1900, actually more specifically. And it is an exuberant style with many types of shingles. It is asymmetrical. It has towers, as we see here on the corner, wraparound porches, and a variety of different shingles and sidings used to add texture and contrast. It has many different types of gables. This gives a perfect example. And what's unusual about this house is that for the period, it faces the view instead of facing the street. That was unusual at the time of construction. By the 1920s, the house had sold, and the new owners in 1928 wanted to modernize it. So they removed a lot of the Victorian trim, covered the house in chicken wire, and stuccoed over the siding. Apparently, they were influenced by Hollywood movies at the time and the Spanish Revival style. Of interest, in the 1970s, when they removed the stucco, fortunately, all of the siding was intact beneath it, and they were able to put back on the trim pieces. In 1979, the house was listed as a Seattle landmark and also listed as on the National Register of Historic Places. What's great about this house, it's one of many, and it's one of the many styles you'll see on the Madrona tour. The area, since the majority of construction was between 1895 and 1930, include Queen Anne, the shingle-style Dutch colonial revival craftsmen, and Tudor residences, but also you'll see a smattering of more contemporary designs after World War II, because the neighborhood, even in fluctuating times, has always had a draw and has always had people wanting to move to it. We're now going to talk about institutions and how they contributed to the built environment and the community's input in that. Like the Goldmark Library, originally a firehouse, there are other institutions on the Madrona tour that exemplify the community involvement in its built environment. These include the Madrona Playfield and Shelter House. An example is in 1927, when the Madrona didn't get their parks levy passed, they taxed themselves to buy a block to put in a park for the children to play in. And by the 1990s, they also came together to renovate it and to restore the 1939 Center House or Shelter House, which is a community center there. There's also the Madrona Elementary School that started originally in 1890, and it was a school that was held in the barn of Dr. George Randall. In 1904, at that same site, a wood frame school was constructed. In 1916, a brick school was built by architect James Steffen. 1961, that same school had an addition and a remodel. The architects were DLR Group. And that same architectural group did another massive renovation and addition in 2002. Again, each phase the Madrona community was involved in. Included is the Al Larkins Park, which is at the north end of the 34th Avenue Business District. Originally in 1968, prior to that, there was a large Queen Anne mansion there. That year it was destroyed by fire. In 1973, with the Madrona's Community Council's urging, the city bought the park on the forward thrust bond measure. And in 1979, based on the Madrona Community Council's recommendation, the city named the park after Alvin Larkins, who was a brilliant musician, teacher, and civil rights activist in the Madrona community. He devoted countless hours and energy to Madrona, where he lived from 1949 until his death in 1977. These are simply examples of how the Madrona community continues to be involved in making sure their community is fulfilling their needs, reflects who they are, and is planning for the future. We really encourage you to take this tour the next time we're able to offer it.